Hello, and welcome to a very special video. Today I'm going to be covering, analyzing, and attempting to give meaning to the absolute enigma that is Petscop. I will be covering Petscop episodes 1 to 16, and I will break this video up into sections. So without further introduction, let's dive into Petscop and see if we can come up with anything. The history of Petscop is easy to explain but needed for newcomers to the series. I do want to stress that if you're watching this video without seeing the whole series, please go and watch it. It's amazing, but don't just take my word for it. Please watch it and come back to me. I'm not going anywhere. On March 11th, 2017, the Petscop channel was created. As Paul puts it, it's a family channel. The name Petscop is also the name of the game, and the name of the YouTube channel as well. I'm not the first to put the name through an anagram solver, but I did anyhow and came up with the result Coppets. I personally believe that this may be the last name of the family that owns the channel, assuming that it is the family's channel, but that's just speculation. Getting back on topic, the first video was uploaded on March 12th, 2017 and currently sits at 1.3 million views. Shortly after that, a subreddit was created dedicating to solving it, giving us the Petscop Comprehensive Progress Guide, which covers all the bases on everything we need to know. The uploads ranged from March 12th, 2017 to October 31st, 2018. I speak about it in the past tense due to the fact that the final upload has an atmosphere of finality to it, but I'll get back to that later on. What's important to deduce here is that Petscop is the first of its kind, an entirely original, genuinely creepy series that was created entirely by the owner. There is no piggybacking off of any sort of game franchise or company, just inspiration. The storytelling is unique, which gives us that much more of a chill. It wasn't until Petscop would begin to ramp up that we would realize this game has many different layers to it. In Petscop 1, we are introduced to the world that we will spend 16 episodes in. Paul creates a save file and starts the game. He never states who it is he's made these recordings for, but one could speculate that it's a close friend or even a relative, and that's where the narrative starts. Someone recording a game to prove it's real, kind of in the same vein as the old creepypastas on haunted cartridges, only legitimate in this case. Paul starts off in the gift plane and eventually makes his way into Even Care, an oddly sterile environment that acts more like a prison than an adoption center in my opinion. The object of the game is to catch what the game refers to as pets, despite the fact that it also refers to these pets as somebody, and you will come to find that these aren't normal animals. Something I noticed while the pets were being caught was the fact that their names are scrawled, almost as if a child named them, or as if the game was trying to make us think that perhaps the pets themselves are children. Something else that caught my eye as unnerving was the fact that catching the pets requires you to take advantage of their weaknesses and use deception in order to catch them. Paul then reveals a note that reads,
I walked downstairs, and when I got to the bottom, instead of proceeding, I turned the right and became a shadow monster man. Below that, a date, June 13th, 1997. For you, please go to my website on the sticker, and also go to Ronith's room, and press start, and press down, 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 right, start.
Something I immediately noticed was the fact that the buttons being pressed equaled out to 7. If you noticed earlier, the number that he uses to catch pen is also 7. So I'm not exactly sure if it was a coincidence or not. With things like this, you can't really tell how obscure is too obscure. So I kept that in the back of my mind, and I'll explain more of what I think about that later on in this video. Something else that struck me was the fact that the recordings randomly jump cut. This may point to the fact that the recordings Paul are making even earlier on have the mysterious owners of the channel's fingerprints all over it. After Paul enters the cheat code, the music cuts abruptly. Paul walks out of Even Care and a loading screen comes up, and after enhancing the image, it's much more chilling to know that this is staring you in the face. It was for me, at least. Paul then walks out onto the Newmaker plane, and that's where it begins. Something to note, at the end of this video, after the jump cut, Paul says this.
I haven't found anything yet, but I'm thinking if I just keep walking around here, I'm gonna find something eventually. Hey, so I was talking about how I couldn't find anything out here? Well, I just found this. And, last time I came out here, I was walking around in this space here for over an hour. And this time I find this.
That confirms the fact that the jump cuts can simulate long lengths of time. Keep this in mind anytime you see one, because it's a little tiny side note that's often looked over. Something else of note here is this.
I think if I were to restart my console right now, I would not be able to find this again. Probably, because I don't remember what I did.
This, to me, was a subtle and clever way of foreshadowing the fact that the console is always going to be kept on, and it kinda clears up episode 16 a little bit, but more on that when we get there. Paul then ends the video, and with that, Petscop was introduced to the world. It wouldn't be until April 1st, 2017 that the second video would come out, so it had a lot of time to impact an audience. Jumping to Petscop 2, I quite obviously noticed this tone at the beginning. I counted 6 beeps. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. It's one of the only times we hear it. I'm not necessarily sure if it's a red herring or if it's significant at all. It could be tied to the fact that the door randomly opens without Paul knowing it. From then on, it's Paul exploring wherever he is in silence. The only thing you can hear is how eerie it is to hear the sound effect of pieces being collected without the overly happy music. From here on out, the game has turned. Paul hears a phone ring, and after investigating, the phone says Kara has left the room. Kara is a character we'll get to know later on in this video. Kara A, Kara B, and Kara NLM are shown. Paul silently explores a bit more until we come across possibly the most memed thing from this entire series.
That's a dead kid.
What's also interesting to note here is the fact that Michael Hammond was 7 years old when he died. Again, I can't help but wonder how obscure is too obscure, but at this point, I have a definite feeling that Petscop is attempting to tell us something with the number 7. Paul walks into the shed where he's confronted with the sunflower. He plucks the flowers and then goes to the basement where we see Kara NLM. More on her will be covered in episode 3. Paul goes back upstairs, plucks the flowers some more, and goes back downstairs. There we see a destroyed Kara. Paul can't collect her. Now, I had trouble understanding what this meant until it started to dawn on me. And it's insanely dark, so if you're sensitive, I suggest skimming to this part of the video. Our first meeting with Kara is horrendous, if you look at the deeper meaning here. I went to Reddit to see if anybody else noticed this and found only one post, and the person came to the same conclusion as I. Paul is unknowingly deflowering Kara, and that's the term for losing somebody's virginity if you didn't know. Some people may believe it to be reaching, but the scene speaks for itself. We never see Kara before he starts picking away, and when we do, she's crying. He then takes the whole flower out and goes back downstairs to reveal that Kara's destroyed. It's definitely a metaphor and an obvious one in my opinion, and this here cements what Petscop is all about: child abuse. Moving on, we meet an object referred to as tool. Some people believe that the tool could be a wood awl, but it's never confirmed. It definitely looks like it though. The only thing about Tool that I can say for certain is the scrawling looks a lot like the characters' names. This is also the episode where the Quitter's Room is revealed. The only thing that really struck me as odd was the fact that Paul is in the reflection, not the other way around. He then goes behind the bookshelf, that sound from the beginning of the video plays again, and now the reflection is out of sync. Paul questions it, then exits. When he exits, he's back outside where he entered at the start, only his perspective is shifted. Keep this in mind for later. At the start of Petscop 3, Paul is exploring. We come across the phrase, "Good grief and alas." Now previously I mentioned we'd explore Kara's character some more, and this is where it gets interesting. "Good grief and alas" is a line from a Dr. Seuss book, Daisy Had Maisie. In that same book, the line "Nobody Loves Me" comes out, which is where the abbreviation NLM comes from. In the book, funnily enough, a flower bearing a striking resemblance to the flower from Petscop comes out of Maisie's head. People taunt her for the fact that she has a flower growing out of her head, and if you remember what I thought happened in the previous episode, it could be a shaming tactic, or maybe what I initially thought was wrong and it's not as dark as I think. In this episode, Paul explores the different rooms you can get by painting a different combination on the canvas. I have an idea as to what this all points to, but I'll save it for the theory later on in the video. Paul, through these combinations, is able to look at generated rooms based on what the input is. Later on in the video, Paul realizes he can visit Kara and Michael's room by entering the faces he sees on the headstone and building. Paul then goes back to look at Michael's room, and the game informs him that Mike is not inside right now. He is dead, before telling him, "You may visit his room." Inside his room, we see Tool, and a pair of tweezers, I believe. Paul goes back out and puts the face that was on Kara's building on the canvas. The game informs him that Kara is missing, but he may visit her room. This part becomes interesting because in her room, we get a note that reads this: "Your wife says Kara isn't growing eyebrows." You say, "That's a puzzle." You're secretly very excited to hear this news. You're in the bathtub thinking about her. I have a guess at which child you'll pick next. When you find her room, the passage to my right will lead her. She'll appear from the darkness limping, and I'll shoot her in the head. Tiara says young people can be psychologically damaged beyond rebirthing. A young person walks into your school building. They walk in with you. You're holding their hands. They come out crying into their hands because nobody will love them, not ever again. Nobody loves me. They wander the Newmaker plane. My personal interpretation of this is that Care's father is insane and his wife doesn't know it. He abuses her consistently, and the fact that he's in the bathtub thinking about her seems a little too much like the game is trying hard to communicate the dark message I came to thinking of. A lot of people think that the rebirthing and Newmaker terms connotate just that abuse story, but I believe something much darker may be occurring. Again, more will be covered in my theory later on. As for the rest of the note, keep Daisy Head Maisie in mind. Dr. Seuss's story is about somebody becoming unusual through a mark and people ostracize her for it, leading her to believe nobody loves her. Moving on, at the end of the video I noticed that Paul walks out of the library and goes to the right of the screen into a void of black. I thought this meant he turned to the right to become the Shadow Monster Man referred to in the note in Petscop 1, but after thinking about it, I realized something else. First off, it would be the player character's left, not right. Second off, it's directly the same void we see next to Even Care in episode 1. Now think of this. If the Newmaker plane peeled back the game for us to see how twisted it is, Even Care being reflected into the child library would make a lot of sense. It's easy to see. As simple as black and white. Petscop 4 is short, so I'll be skimming over it and moving on to 5. But it touches on something I did not mention in my analysis of episode 2. In the room where Tool is, there is a windmill that Paul must constantly keep watching in episode 2. Nothing really ends up happening besides a creepy atmospheric tone, so he stops and moves on. In Petscop 4, we are where the windmill is, or should I say was. The windmill is gone. Paul doesn't understand why the windmill is gone, but he seems to be explaining something to someone. The only significant thing I was able to see was a character in the top right near the end of the video that briefly reveals itself. This is probably Marvin, a character that appears in later episodes. The only significant thing I have to say about Petscop 4 is that it sets the theme for perspective shifting. Once again, keep this in mind. Petscop 5 deals more with the tool. Paul asks the tool questions, most of them yielding vague answers. However, after asking it "where am I?", it randomly lights up purple. This indicates that the character speaking through the tool has changed. It doesn't answer his question. It asks him to turn off the PlayStation because Marvin picks up the tool and hurts the character when the PlayStation is on. People speculate that Michael may be talking through the tool, as the lack of grammatical skills in spelling and handwriting suggests a little kid is speaking through it. When Paul goes to ask it another question, it changes back. He says, "Who are you?" It says Tool. He asks if the Tool remembers being born, and Tool replies, "I'm not Tiara." The video then ends and we go on to Petscop 6. The thing that was interesting to me here was the fact that Paul isn't familiar with anything being able to possess the tool, for lack of a better term. Once again, keep this in mind. This means that it's a one-time occurrence. Petscop 6 starts us off viewing the windmill. Then it cuts to 2 hours and 39 minutes later. After that, a character walks behind the windmill and causes the windmill to spin the other direction. He then turns the camera and a weird symbol appears on the screen. I have an idea as to what this means, but again, later. The character then asks, "Where is my house? Where is the school?" and then says, "I will follow." After that, the video cuts to the windmill, and the windmill disappears. Paul then travels back to where he was in Petscop 4 and finds where the character was spelling things. He then collects Tonith. The description is presumably the creator of the game telling us how the name Tonith came to be. Tonith is described by 7-year-old Mike as funny, stupid blob monster. Then the text seems to be going into something comparing Tonith to a dog that should be put down because he has a broken leg. Then he decides he'll name him Tonith before repeating Tonith a ton. It's almost as if someone insane wrote this. There seems to be no real connection between thoughts or anything, but there simply isn't enough evidence to say whoever wrote this has a condition. A personal theory of mine might be that the dog he's referring to is actually 7-year-old Mike. Dogs are often innocent, or seen as such. Dogs can't really do any wrong, and I guess in his opinion, 7-year-old Mike can't really do anything wrong either. Perhaps Mike got hurt and needed to be put down, in this character's opinion. But again, there's no real connection between thoughts or anything really. It then shows another page for pets, and clearly the outline for Care is there. As I thought in the beginning, the game treats children like pets that you can catch. Then there's the Book of Baby Names option in the menu that never really gets shown, but speaks for itself. Usually when people adopt or have children, they look through a book of baby names. This just further cements the fact that the entire game really surrounds itself with adoption and children. The fact that you can just catch these pets after taking advantage of them really cements the fact, among other things like the deflowering of care, that these children are being abused. But again, I'll get into it later. We're then shown the windmill is gone before the video cuts to Paul asking the tool, "Where is my house?" The tool then informs him, "You'll never go home." When he asks, "Where is the school?" it replies, "You'll never go back in time." Then the video cuts to the backyard area where Michael is buried. Paul then says this.
This game is trying very hard to make it seem like there's an entity in it. Like a ghost or an AI trying to communicate with me. It's interesting. But you know, the way you know that there's a ghost in a game trying to communicate with you is if it comes out, if it stops being distant, and it comes out and you can have a real-time back and forth with it. And it stops being so one-way.
This foreshadows what's going to be happening later on in the episodes. He also mentions there's a bit of randomness in the game and that it's interesting. The video then ends. This episode I had been looking forward to because I felt that it had some answers in it, but of course, it raised more questions than answers. At the beginning, Paul is back in the mirror room. We can audibly hear him shuffling papers or something, meaning he's either got a tutorial or script in front of him. It is also entirely possible that Paul is writing something down. We can't know for sure. Suddenly, music begins playing. When it's finished, Paul's reflection appears. We then see the "Do you remember being born" page from earlier, only this time there's a reply. It says, "Come here." I believe this was written by Michael, who has now possessed the tool. The video cuts to Paul visiting the tool, and the tool says, "I love you, Newmaker. Please show Marvin where his house is." This confirms that the character we saw out by the windmill is Marvin. Paul then attempts to ask the tool, "Who are you?" But the tool ignores his question and tells him to go there and he'll follow you. His daughter is there. He asks the tool, "Remember being born?" And the tool responds again, ignoring his question. He also wants 1,000 pieces for the machine beyond the school stairway. The video then cuts to Paul, attempting to make a deposit into the child library. When he tries depositing pets, the game tells him that the library only accepts people. He then clicks through Pen's description, which is pretty interesting. It reads that Pen is an aspiring mathematician, but she's entirely deaf. She doesn't even know what sound is, let alone music. I don't know what she's doing here. The video then cuts to Paul entering Michael's face on the canvas without the eyebrows. The reason for doing this, according to Paul, is...
Well, because eyebrows seem to be important.
This causes Paul to enter Care's room with eyebrows. Here's what happens next.
So this is Care with eyebrows. I put Mike's eyebrows on her. I could have put other eyebrows on her, but I didn't. I put Mike's on her. I don't know, maybe that's just something that it puts in any room.
Whatever's behind that sensor bar has clearly shocked Paul and caused him to go in denial. He says that it could be something that it puts in any other room. Then, there's an oddity at the end of the video. Text comes up that reads, "We've had to cover something with a black box. Right now, we can't say why. Some other things we're expecting to censor in the future. A big present with a sticker on it. Something written on a wall in a black house. Written on a chalkboard." This is very out of place for a Petscop video, and marks a turning point in the series. What's more is the fact that the number 7 appeared so many times before it. It seems extremely too good to be true that the 7th episode would mark such a turning point, especially when we've seen the number 7 pop up many times before episode 7. However, as I said before, you can't tell how obscure is too obscure. Something else of note here is the fact that the message at the end says "we." This is the first encounter we have with the proprietors, the mysterious group that owns the channel and its recordings. Another thing to note is the fact that the message says right now they can't say why. This could mean that in the future we will know what's censored, but as of right now, nothing can be known for sure. Petscop 7 then ends, leaving people wondering what could have possibly been so important to censor. Petscop 8 starts us with Paul exploring, once again. He's in front of a road where cars are passing through and pretty fast. He notices the cars only trigger when he's not on the road. This repeats until Marvin emerges from the road, taking Paul by surprise. He then begins following Marvin. Marvin then points out the school and the house before running into a wall. Then he takes off and Paul can't find him. Paul then spends the rest of the video trying to find Marvin unsuccessfully. He tries going up a level to find him and can't. The video then cuts, and we get to hear a phone conversation between Paul and somebody we don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not here now. There's not even a passageway or anything. Can you remember when you saw this? Well, it could have changed between then and 2004. After 2004, my mom had it reportedly. Well, okay. Thanks.
The video abruptly cuts just like that. My personal belief is that Paul is speaking to a close friend or family member. My original thought was that whoever he was on the phone with is whoever he made the recordings for, but after further thought, I think whoever he's making these recordings for and whoever he's talking to on the phone are two different people. Recall what Paul says at the beginning of the series. Whoever he's making these videos for can't have any background knowledge of the game, because Paul's attempting to prove whoever he's recording these for wrong. Perhaps a friend that didn't believe his claims of an old PS1 game that never hit shelves. Paul also mentions in his call that it could have changed between then and 2004. Again, we see another instance of the number 7 as Garalina published the game in 1997, and a major turning point in the story takes place in 2004, but we don't know if the person he's speaking to even played the game in 1997. This episode was pretty short and kinda seemed like it was trying to extend the cliffhanger from the previous episode. Everyone was asking themselves at the time what the censored object could have possibly been. Something else I realized was at the beginning of this video, we see cars going by. In Petscop 6, we were told that Tanith is being compared to a dog that got hit by a car. This could be where the incident takes place, or maybe I'm just reaching a little bit. I don't know for certain, but I thought it was an interesting observation. Petscop 9 is our first encounter with a demo recording. These seem really out of place and act like they have nothing to do with the story overall. They actually play a major role in later episodes, so I'll wait till then to get into it. The demo recording shows where Penn was, and the player character walks on the treadmill, stopping at 3 for a long while before going to 0. The recording then cuts to Paul, and he's back in the shed. Essentially, it seems as though he's trying to figure something out, and he does. He turns to the right and becomes the Shadow Monster Man. While Paul is the Shadow Monster Man, he can approach the windmill and see it. When he goes inside, there's a tool, a canvas, and an odd contraption that has someone's face on it. When Paul uses the tool, the screen goes blank and he collects pieces, precisely 50 of them. A strange tone seems to be playing in the background. The video then cuts to Paul not being the Shadow Monster Man and the windmill is gone. The sound is still playing. The video then cuts to Paul at the canvas. He draws the face from the canvas in the windmill. The game informs him, "You found her. You may visit her room." The video then cuts to the room. At the beginning, we see Paul's character in the same room as it walks out. This is quite odd for anybody first viewing this, but it isn't our first interaction with synchronization. I'll explain more later on. On the table is the tool and a windmill model. Paul then reads a note. "You must have guessed, but I was looking through your things. I found that picture of you from 1977 standing in front of an old windmill with your friend. You went there, and it was a bad idea. Your friend and the windmill both disappeared into thin air. Her sister was holding the camera. She took another picture minutes later. Just you. No windmill and no friend. You married her sister, and years later your friend was reborn as your daughter. Your wife won't admit this is true, but I know it because I found the evidence. Your friend never returned with you, and the windmill was gone. I went to see it myself. Where is it? What did you do? Signed, Rainer." Newmaker. I have a vague idea to what this note means, and I'll explain it best I can later. After that, Paul exits the room in the same fashion as his clone previously did, and this, again, is explained in future episodes. Paul walks down a long corridor before coming to some kind of party room. Paul collects a key from the box on the right, and then opens the box on the left. This is where our second sensor from the series comes in, a big present with a sticker on it. Whatever is in the box both surprises and scares Paul. I've done some reading on this, and a lot of people believe it to be Mike's body in the box, due to the fact that his headstone seems to confirm it when it says Mike was a gift. After this, the video cuts. We see Paul walking around. Eventually, the box is revealed and nothing is in it. Paul seems to be looking for something hidden, and he eventually finds a secret room with another present. The camera plays a cutscene, and we go inside of the box. Some odd music plays for a bit, seems to skip out, and then the video cuts to Paul walking into what people in the community refer to as odd care because of the fact that things are slightly different. For instance, the demo theme is playing instead of the normal even care theme, and Paul is walking into a different entrance. Paul then eventually finds the treadmill from the demo in Penn's room and begins walking on it. The treadmill maxes out at 16, so Paul goes the other way. The treadmill then goes to -1. The game then crashes and Paul restarts it. Now, we see Paul walking back into the basement. Kara NLM is then caught. Her description reads, Kara NLM escaped from the school basement and wandered the Newmaker plane for days. To catch her, you had to lie, but it may not be a lie forever. You're the Newmaker. You can turn Kara NLM to Kara A and close the loop. Paul then walks into the white cube in the background and the video cuts to the child library, and Paul deposits Kara NLM. The game informs him that he's choosing to leave Kara NLM, and if he changes his mind within 6 months, he can take her back. Then the game asks, what month is it, anyway? What year is it? The video then cuts to him visiting her room. Then he catches Kara NLM again. Oddly enough, the video ends. Petscop 10 begins with Paul walking around Oddcare with the key. Paul flips a switch in Amber's room and attempts to exit Oddcare. The door closes him in. Then the video cuts to Paul at the title screen looking at his files. Here we see that both of his files, Paul and Backup, have a panic save warning written in, warning of possible corruption. The file is then loaded anyway. We then see Paul re-entering Oddcare through the gift, and then he walks into Amber's room. He looks at the camera and says, there you go. What happened here is subtle, but very smart. Paul is attempting to see if what he does in the game saves, whether or not he actually saves the game. Paul reloads the game and then sees the switches, still in the same order he left them. This may point to the fact that despite him playing the game for the first time, the things the previous players did in the game are still remembered within the game. This could explain predictive behavior to some extent. The video then cuts to Paul walking to the quitter's room, but now, since entering Oddcare, he's on the other side of the mirror. Paul then leaves the quitter's room and goes to Tool and asks him, what month is it? The Tool responds with a calendar. Paul asks, what year is it? The Tool doesn't respond, instead keeping the calendar in front of it. The video cuts, and Paul asks, where was the windmill? A black sensor box pops up, and the video ends. Not much can be dissected from this because of how sudden it happens. Normally, as with the gift box sensor, we see just a slight bit of it before it's covered. Here, the whole tool gets covered. Something else that continues popping up is this box with a symbol on it. I really am not entirely sure what it can be, but I do believe it's a way to travel to different areas of the game. You'll see this in later episodes. With that being said, this episode is one of the shorter ones, and doesn't seem like it holds that much of a value to the overall series. But when backing up and looking at all the episodes, even the minor ones like this, they do offer a ton of information, and I will be coming back to them. This is one of the longer videos on the channel, but it reveals a lot. In the beginning of the video, Paul's once again talking to someone, and we don't know who.
But when I found my room, it made, well, I was shocked at first, but it made sense. Especially considering where I found the game in the first place. That would be tied in some way to me through you. And I'm trying to think, when was the last time I saw any of you at all? It had to have been like 1999. I was a kid. I was a small kid. Tiny kid.
Paul mentions that he hasn't seen what I assume to be his family since 1999. Another thing he confirms is that the room with the censored item is his room. Paul then goes on to mention that he's trying something within the game and that he drew some sort of diagram that kind of explains what he's trying to do. Essentially, what Paul ends up doing here is walking around in a circle in a certain pattern. I personally believe this to be sort of like a lock combination. At least that's the best way I can explain it. He's walking around in what seems like random patterns. The lock combination analogy will make some sense. sense later on, so keep it in mind. When Paul finally does complete the ritual, he is presented with a gray ask screen, sorta like the tool. The video then weirdly cuts after Paul concludes he's supposed to pass on asking a question, and we see a tire mounted on what I assume to be a pole or something to that effect. As Paul walks around it, notice that the tire rotates like a lock would. Paul is again prompted with the question screen upon completion, and he asks, "Where is house?" The tire then begins rotating. He follows the direction it appears to be pointing to and ends up on a road. He walks up to a sign that reads, "This is a frozen house, captured 3 times, exactly as it was." Paul then approaches the house. The key works, but he can't open the door. This is a callback to the first episode of Petscop when the game informs him that he can't open doors anyway. The video cuts again, and Paul is explaining that the road also works as a sort of lock sequence with the top going to the right and the bottom going to the left. After walking along the road, going right, left, right, the door to the house is open. This is where things get insanely interesting. Paul walks into the house and notes that there are people that seem to move around the house. Then someone in blue text asks, "Where have you been? Why were you gone for such a long time?" Then, when walking by the Christmas tree, it asks, "Is this a present? Who is it for?" Paul then opens a calendar where we see days highlighted in green. There's a lot of speculation as to what this means, but the one I think it could be is a custody arrangement, which is also highlighted in the comprehensive progress guide. I'll explain why I personally believe this later on in the video. Paul then says,
I don't remember meeting this girl at all. I don't remember knowing her at any point. And I remember you saying that we are, exactly the same age, right? I just don't remember even hearing about anyone going missing.
Here, he's referring to Care and how they are exactly the same age. He then says, "I don't remember hearing about anyone going missing." He seems to not have any recollection of any event taking place in between June 5th and November 10th. Care was missing for 158 days, according to this. We also learn that the date in the house is December 25th, which we could have guessed from the Christmas tree in there anyway. Paul is then granted access to the bathroom after asking, strangely enough. Upon entering the bathroom, a strange, glitched out cinematic plays with an even stranger jingle. Paul is then seen in the bathroom where he walks into the white cube with the symbol on it, which I said earlier that I believe this allows travel to different parts of the game. This is why. The video then cuts, and we go back to the title screen and then access a demo to Petscop. While it's loading, we see this image. I believe these loading screen images foreshadow events for later videos. The demo shows the road from Petscop 8, and then we begin to travel down the road. As we travel down the road, we see a clock ticking, showing that it is 3. I assumed immediately that it must have been 3 in the morning since it's always dark out, but it doesn't say for sure. The minute hand then shifts, revealing to us that it isn't 3 a.m. at all. The clock is weirdly tilted, and if we assume that the point in which the second passing causes the clock to shift is 12, then the time is actually around 5:11. When the seconds reach the minute hand, the video cuts, and then comes back to show us that it is past the hour hand. This, again, shows that cuts can simulate lengths of time. Why this was cut, I have no idea. The clock is also about an hour ahead, as it's now 6. The moment it becomes 6:15, we reach a structure. We then cut to see Marvin. Marvin is able to speak to us using combinations on his controller. It doesn't spell Paul's name correctly, but it gets the general idea across. Then Paul responds, but he says hell instead of hello. When he corrects himself, Marvin pointed out that it was funny that he said hell and laughs. A little unnerving, but nothing is further explained about this. They both then head into the school. During the loading screen, we see a face, which a lot of people assume to be Marvin. For a reason, because he's holding a very interesting tool that we'll see later on in this video. In the school, we have a first-person perspective, despite the fact that we have the illusion of a third-person one with Paul's character. I say first-person because when the frames glitch, it absolutely looks that way. In the school, tool is a usable item. We then see a lock on a locker. This is where my earlier theory on it being a lock metaphorically came from, and once we find out the significance of the demos, we'll understand why this is all happening. We cut to Paul then walking back into the bathroom, and the jingle plays again, only the cinematic is reversed. Paul takes note of the fact that the white block isn't there anymore. There exists only one calendar in the house now, which I believe means he's in the 1997 version of the house. Then we read a note. "My husband may come after 6 p.m. Please stay overnight if you can. Thank you so much. And the note ends with the symbol from Petscop 6. It is currently June 5th according to the calendar. If you remember, Care went missing on June 5th until November 10th. Keep this in mind. Paul walks into Care's room and we see Care at the foot of her bed, either shivering from fear or the cold. It's not really apparent as to which one. The in-game clock in her room reads 6:10. The video cuts and the clock has jumped forward. Paul then gets trapped in the closet at 6:15. At 6:15, Marvin busts in and takes Care. The game informs us that Care's left the room. Paul then has to repeat this, and he does. Care A has been caught, and her description reads this. When the emergency began, you were all looking for Care A. I told you all, we would never find Care A. When Care A goes missing, she goes missing forever. My brother didn't want us to find him because he knew we were all looking for Michael A. I'm back. This is my present for you. I started it in 1996 for Marvin. If you think they're worth any effort, see if you can save Care B or Care NLM. Care B is in the school, of course. Fuck you all, and fuck me as well. Merry Christmas. Check your bathroom now. Signed, Rainer. Paul goes to check the bathroom and the video cuts back to the demo in the school. We wander around and find a classroom with Marvin in it. Marvin says, play music for baby, she will become Melody. Paul says, thanks. While playing, Marvin says lovely twice before the music goes red and Marvin says, she tripped and fell and is lost. Later Marvin says stop. Paul says sorry. Marvin says Tiara plays bad music too. Do it right next time. Paul says that he's sad, and Marvin just says, okay, Paul. The video then ends, unloading massive amounts of information on us. As with the previous episodes, more questions than answers have arisen. Something to note is that when we reach the structure at earlier points in this video, it turns to 6:15. Care is kidnapped at 6:15. Definite connection here. Just thought I should point it out. Petscop 12 opens us up with yet again another demo sequence. In this demo sequence, we are in the Quitter's room. There is no reflection. The video then cuts to the player walking back into the Quitter's room. Now there is a reflection, one we haven't seen before, with a pyramid for a head. This character acts like the rest of the reflected characters we see throughout the series. The importance or significance of these characters is still debated. The character then walks out of the Quitter's room, stumbling around and eventually making its way to a hallway where a text box is prompted. The message reads, "Hi Belle, you're free. I left these messages for you to look at in case you were ever rescued. So while you walk around looking for something to do, I'll come up periodically. When these messages run out, I'll be out of your hair forever and ever." The video then cuts to Michael's grave where the character walks over to the white fence. A message box appears, notifying us that the game has been running for 153,822 hours, which is equivalent to 17 years. The game has been running non-stop for 17 years, which is pretty crazy to consider. The text then reads, "That looks dubious to me. What do you think?" The video then cuts to the character walking by the good grief in a last statement before more text fades in. "Are you still sitting on a chair?" it asks. "Can you still look around the room? Is there a room?" it questions. Then it introduces the child library, explaining that the player didn't get their traits added to the system because they aren't family. The character makes their way above ground, where we come across Marvin's character. It tells the player not to get lost. Once the player ventures out on their own, it reads, "Happy birthday, Belle." More text begins to fade in, but it jump cuts. Then more text comes that says, "I'm calling you Belle because that's who you are. You might be confused as to what happened. I was overeager before and started calling you Tiara prematurely. I created a space on the menu for you, still unused now. Then I put you inside the machine and played the second movement of Stravinsky's septet on the needles. I played it wrong, but that should have been okay. If you hadn't given up halfway, you would be Tiara. This is not what happened, and now I'm gone." The video ends, giving us an answer as to what may be happening. At the same time, it gives us 50 more questions. Another demo video. This video starts with the player in Care's house. The player in the demo reveals themselves to be Paul, who's pushing a bucket around. Eventually, he makes his way towards the road, and the tool is seen mimicking Paul's movements. It's another puzzle. Later on in this video, we see this puzzle is used to catch Ronith. His character description goes as follows. Ronith is Tanith's baby half-brother. Since he's younger, he gets to learn from all of Tanith's mistakes. That's why he always looks both ways. He doesn't get into trouble. You won't have to watch him all the time. He's good. Quite obviously, Ronith looking both ways is inspired by the fact that Tanith got hit by a car. Afterwards, the game cuts to Paul capturing Amber again in the demo screen, and then the game thanks him for playing, saying he caught everyone except Tanith because he's not available yet. Then the game informs him to keep the PlayStation running and tells him that he can stand up. Afterwards, we hear somebody leaving, and the video cuts to black with a thud. While 13 was definitely short, 14 makes up for it by clocking in at 27 minutes long. Once again, in a demo screen, the game gives us a riddle to solve about the windmill right at the beginning. It goes as follows. There are two pictures of a door. In the first picture, the door is closed. In the second picture, the door is opened. Nobody opened the door. The door did not open itself. The door, in fact, did not open at all. What happened? The character then begins walking around sporadically before the video cuts to Paul in the house once more. This part of the video explains something about the series as a whole that gives us a lot of answers.
And this idea involves pretending that this door, right here, this one, is open rather than closed. You can see that it's closed, but what I'm going to do, and what I invite you to do as well, is I'm going to picture in my head that this door is actually open right now. And if I were to pass through this doorway, what would happen? Would I bump into a door? No, because the door is open, right? I would just keep going into the room that's there. And I happen to know I'm going to walk into the room right now. I'm in the room. I happen to know what this room looks like because I saw it in a demo recording just today. And you can see it too. I assume it will be up on the family YouTube along with this video that I'm recording right now.
What Paul is explaining here, if it was unclear to anyone, is that whatever he does in the normal game reflects into the demo game recordings. If Paul makes a movement in the actual game, he can go and watch those movements unfold in the demo game. In other words, it mirrors his actions over into the demo. This is where the symbolism from the mirror room originates. Essentially, the next couple of minutes is Paul attempting to figure out how to work the system in his favor, as he has to cover what the censored item in the bedroom is with the bucket of paint. When Paul does cover the censored item, a key appears. Paul uses this key to open the door to the room at the front of the house to the right of the couch. After he does so, an odd sound plays and then the Garolito logo comes in, only this time it's shifted. Once he views the save files, there's one named Strange Situation. Paul continues the game and winds up back at the house. This time at the entrance, he's greeted with balloons. When he enters the house, he's greeted with dialogue. The dialogue is assuming that Paul's character is Care. They ask why she's covering her face and then mention how it still looks like her because of the eyes and nose. This points towards the fact that her eyebrows are most likely missing. After all of this, Paul walks into the bedroom. This is what happens.
Wait a second.
Clearly, Paul is uncomfortable. He goes on to explain the conversation was based on a conversation Paul had last year on his birthday. Then, Paul says he has to call Jill before the video cuts once again. This could be the person he was on the phone with in previous episodes. When Paul comes back, he starts up the save file again and explains that he asked the internet if you could rewrite to a CDR since he couldn't believe the game actually could have translated the conversation. Paul then goes into the garage and finds the computer with the Petscop website on it. The video ends with Paul walking into the bedroom before a censor bar comes up. Paul responds with,
"Fuck."
And the video ends. This video starts in the school, and as the character wanders around, they run into the painting of a girl multiple times. Music begins playing as the words girl float around, but I genuinely can't tell you what the significance of this is. The character then wanders into a room where he sits down and meets Tiara, who Marvin refers to as Belle. Tiara then tells the player to press Nifty on the first controller. Once the character figures out what that is, a tileset editor comes up. The character draws on the blackboard and realizes that he can edit in-game assets. I believe this episode to be nothing but an answer to Paul's question in the last video where he asked if you can rewrite to a CDR. If the game actually allows you to edit in-game assets, then somebody could have very well been playing a prank on Paul as he mentions. That's the only answer to his question I can come up with because honestly it boggles my mind just as much. The final entry to the series, Petscop 16, starts unlike any Petscop entry we've seen before. The video begins with a view of the garage before flashing a warning message that indicates the controller hasn't received input in a long time, and that they should call a censored number on the screen. Then we get breaks of what seems to be surveillance of a room, and the video ends. Just like that, nothing else happens. No grand finale, no final reveals, just a bunch more questions. So what does it all mean? With a number of loose ends, questions, symbolism, etc., what kind of substance can we actually take away from the game? Well, to answer that question, we're going to be examining some popular theories from the fanbase before getting into my own theory about the entire story itself. One of the most popular theories is the Candice Newmaker theory. Due to the fact that the name Newmaker appears as the Newmaker plane, rebirthing therapy makes an appearance in the Quitter's room, which is also tied to the Newmaker case, and to the fact that the adoption theme is quite a common theme, a lot of people tend to go with this one, and with good reason. The Newmaker theory, however, doesn't seem to explain a lot of things, and I believe the inspiration to use the name Newmaker, or even the question, do you remember being born, is because it sets the tone of the theme we're to be expecting. Petscop is heavily influenced with themes of adoption and child abuse, and although it isn't necessarily hard to see why people tend to lean on this theory as the answer, it isn't the full story. It serves as inspiration, perhaps. Another popular theory that has shaped a lot of other theories is the color theory. The theory that the names of characters and their corresponding colors have direct meaning either through the emotion these colors invoke or through the way certain items are colored. For instance, the tool's text being the same color as the text on Michael's tombstone may indicate that Michael was speaking through the tool, which isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. But again, this doesn't answer the full story. The third and final theory I wanted to discuss was popularized by MatPat at Game Theory. For those of you who haven't heard his theory, it ultimately boils down to him explaining that the character in Petscop switches through multiple dimensions, and that the door didn't open or close on its own because the door itself was captured at two different moments in the dimension of time. The windmill didn't exist in another photo because it wasn't there in another dimension. MatPat's theory is the first I've ever really heard that's attempted to go all the way and explain what the series as a whole was saying, but even then, he can't cover everything, and even says as much. He knows that there's more, he just can't get to it or he can't uncover it. While I agree with parts of the theory, I didn't necessarily agree with it as a whole. Here's what my theory is. First of all, it's important to keep in mind that, like any work of fiction, Petscop is subject to interpretation. This is my interpretation based on what I've seen. To begin with, I don't think Paul is just your average Let's Player. I think he definitely makes recordings, but it's been revealed that they aren't really intended for an audience as they are for a quote-unquote friend. But I don't even think that's the case. Personally, I think that the proprietors of the channel, the mysterious owners, actually contracted Paul to make these recordings and check in on him every so often by visiting him and collecting the research he's made. Recall the text when Paul enters the bedroom in episode 14. He said that that text was based off a conversation he had. For this reason, I believe that Jill must have done something with the disk and discovery pages Paul was using for his research, causing him to become frustrated. This is further proven by the fact that after all this, Paul seems extremely angry, not to mention the fact that he mentions he needs to call Jill. Perhaps because he thought that maybe Jill was messing with him, but I personally believe that the PlayStation adapts to its environment and its surroundings along with the game, and I think that's why the PlayStation is required to stay on at all times. I believe that the game's symbolism with mirrored realities, such as the demo recordings and the game actions being translated over, refer to what is going on in real life. There are two mirrored realities. The reality outside of the recordings, which is with Paul, and the reality inside the recordings, which is with the game. I think the game has learned to mirror events that go on outside of the game and translate them into the game itself. But I think it becomes much deeper, darker, and sinister than that. I believe Rainer made the game for Marvin to play that would have eventually driven him insane, and I think slowly that's what's happening to Paul by having to constantly record this game with the PlayStation always on. If Marvin abducted or adopted children just to test and experiment on them or abuse them, Rainer caught wind of this and included it in his game. That is why there's Newmaker symbolism everywhere, to compare Marvin's actions to the wickedness and cruelty that happened in the Newmaker situation. But at the end of the day, personally, and this may seem like a cop-out, no pun intended, I believe that there really is truly no way to rationalize Petscop as a whole, and it was never intended to be, at least not with what we've been given. The genius of the series is that no matter what, it will constantly and always leave you guessing. And for about 2 months or so, myself working on this video, I felt like I was going crazy attempting to do it justice by trying to explain every nook and cranny that existed in the series. I believe that Paul is in our boat and he reflects our emotions tied to the series. series. He's insanely curious about the game and its meaning, its history, but in the end he can't even will himself out of bed to attempt to go another day shooting in the dark with a bunch of information he can't extrapolate any meaning from. The reason I said episode 16 had an air of finality to it was because that's the only way a series like this can end ambiguously, and that's what will make us talk about it for years to come. Paul was under surveillance in episode 16 by the proprietors, just as we are under surveillance by the creators of the series itself by making tons of theories. The mystery behind the series was never meant to be solved, and for me, that's what makes this series so remarkable. And I honestly believe it's one of the most genius web series I've seen in a long, long time.